Special Operations Training Detachment, SOD West, Burro Team. Coming at you from NTC, Off the Radar.
This is Off the Radar. I'm Captain Weston Rich, an observer coach trainer for the Green Berets at the National Training Center. Thank you for joining us for part 2 of our discussion with Dillion about targeting and fires. Last time, we covered the 96-hour targeting process used by the conventional and joint force. In this episode, we will discuss RSOF's role in the assessment phase of the targeting process, RSOF's integration with conventional forces, and more. All right, so back to targeting. What is target nomination? Like, how does that work?
So the way it works is that if we're talking your division core level fires, there's going to be a joint target coordination board, which is going to have representation from the Joint Force Land component, the Joint Force Air component, the Joint Force Maritime component, and the Joint Force Special Operations component. And essentially, this is the time for all of the components to come together and have their top prioritized targets during a certain targeting cycle, and be like, these are the target, and it's going to be just like probably like one sliders. Like when I went to the Joint Operational Fires and Effects course, this was like our practical exercise at the end, and every student was either part of one of the components.
Okay. And
so based off of like the enemy situation and the scenario and everything like that, we had to choose targets that we thought as that component would prioritize based off of the component's effects that they're trying to meet to support objectives. Because obviously every component is going to have different effects they're trying to achieve based off the guidance of the Joint Force Commander.
Okay.
So they all do all their stuff, and then they have their like one sliders or something like that, and they're sitting in a room, and it's like, hey, you have 30 seconds to pitch your target, go. And then you pitch your target. You know, you give basic data, information, significance, this, that, and the other, desired effect, so on and so forth. And then, you know, all the components are going to go through all their targets. And then jointly is when they formalize like their actual prioritized target list.
Okay.
And that's your nomination phase. And it's either going to make above the cut line or below the cut line. And just because it's below the cut line doesn't mean they might not be able to find assets to support it during that fight. It just means at the beginning of the targeting cycle or at the beginning of the execution, you're not going to have something dedicated. But,
okay,
you know, that's when you get into like possible shifts in fires, or maybe, you know, you have like your ground close air support or your GCAS or XCAS. I don't remember the acronym. But like maybe they can get, you know, or something on the ATO could get rediverted or retasked to support it. But as of right now, below the cut line, you're not going to have something dedicated to it.
Okay. Is there like a J3 operations officer type person that's chairing this meeting, or is it like the Joint Force Commander kind of sitting there? It's
going to be, I'm trying to remember from the course, because let's all understand here, I'm not a fires professional, so I'm just an SF guy who got to go to some courses. I don't exactly remember who, but it's like some member of the staff is going to help facilitate and run it.
Yeah, chief of staff or somebody, yeah.
Yeah, some sort of in the fires world.
Okay. Important person is taking the inputs of the target nominations and then prioritizing them, and then a commander is approving it at the decision board.
Right.
Okay.
It's going to be somebody of the Joint Force Commander's staff.
Gotcha. Cool. And I mean, that can be replicated at a detachment level. I've seen it during a rotation at JRTC.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it was the Fox was leading most of the working groups until it came to the decision board, where the detachment commander received briefs on, hey, these are the targets or these are the NAIs that we think we need to go recon to determine in the targeting cycle if there's something of value to then go affect later. And that would really drive their operations, because that particular rotation was a little bit more what we call free play than most. So the detachment had to do a lot of its own bottom-up operations and targeting cycle to figure out, like, what actually is in the operational environment and how can we affect it for our higher echelon units in the conventional force. And is there anything, we mentioned convergence windows. Is there anything else you want to mention about it, or like give it a brief overview of like what it is so that help people like understand what a convergence window is?
Yeah, I think it'd be good to explain kind of in big picture convergence windows, because a lot of people haven't heard those terms till they come out to NTC or JRTC.
I mean,
I had no idea. I was like, what does this word mean? But yeah, so convergence windows, as far as like SOF's role in it, is basically, you know, here it's replicated by a brigade, but the brigade's going to have their like scheme of maneuver, their campaign plan. And throughout these phases, they're going to want to have their supporting efforts, such as SOF, executing things in a certain period of time, whether it's, you know, during the night before or during the beginning or at some point in the operation. They're going to want their supporting efforts to do some sort of operation or act that would possibly help support their campaign plan. And so like that window of time is your convergence window.
So I would say that typically they get a specific operational area. So for like at the detachment level, a convergence window ends up being a time and a place. Hey, in this 2-hour period or so, in this general area, you're going to attack to destroy XYZ C2 node or whatever. You're going to do something that affects the joint force in a positive manner. You know, you're degrading, disrupting, or denying the enemy something, and then enabling our coalition forces to maneuver or do something else.
Like a prime historic example for convergence windows, which that wasn't even a word then, was D-Day. You know, you've got like the 82nd and 101st jumping in, and like during this time window, they had, you know, tasks X, Y, and Z in support of the main effort that's going to be coming in that next morning at 0 dark 30. So like that would be a convergence window in a historical term.
Yeah, no, great. So D3EA or whatever the acronym is.
Decide, detect, deliver, and assess.
Okay, I added a letter there. All right. I thought so. D3A, the assessment portion of it. You mentioned it previously in the 96-hour process. Hey, the first thing we do is we look back 24 hours and we assess what we did. So like, how does SOF get value or present value during the assessment or to the assessment phase?
So SOF's greatest way to support the assessment phase is just because of where we are in time and space during LSCO, being out there in the deep fight. You know, going kind of back to GWAT real quick is just, you know, we had so many capabilities to provide the assessments for us. We had our ISR, you know, you have all these communication and collection capabilities that you can provide you with all of that. But with the denied or contested airspace or just a contested environment in general, SOF's the people who have the access and they are in that location. And they're the only ones, not the only ones, but they're able to provide the best assessments for, you know, collateral damage estimates, for munition effectiveness, and help make adjustments to follow on targeting cycles based off what they're seeing out there. And then you go into, you know, even the part of the triad, your PSYOP or CA world is, you know, like civil affairs or PSYOPs has the ability to see what the second, third, and fourth order of effects look like. You know, post whatever type prosecutions happened.
Absolutely. Well, great. Yeah. SOF can provide value to the conventional force in the assessment, and then understanding that, like, even though you might be the executing unit of the target, whether it's lethal or non-lethal, like, you still have the requirement to go report battle damage assessment, and that might be kind of more challenging on a non-lethal side or an information operations side, but like you got to figure out how effective or ineffective those operations were, and then use that knowledge to move forward in the operation and decide if you're going to, you know, use that means again, or you're going to change up your approach, especially when it comes to like information operations for the civil affairs and the PSYOPs folks. Right. What's at this the combat training centers is some common shortfalls for special operations forces in relation to targeting?
So I would say some of the common themes that we see out here, it mostly begins with the AOBs coming out here and the target working group package they bring. And this is not like to speak for every rotation. There's been some that have had a little more of a package, and then there's been some that lacked a package completely, but commonly across all of them, the package is not including all of the necessary personnel you should have within a target working group. You see some RTUs come out here, and their target working group consists of an 18 Fox on the B team, who's hopefully an actually qualified Fox, because we see that happen a lot too, because of being able to get courses done. And then maybe a couple 35 series with them.
Okay.
And that's an Intel fusion cell.
Yeah,
That's
Intel,
not. So bringing in all the necessary people when you come out to NTC or JRTC, that's going to include having a TAC P, for the air side of the house, having a 13 Alpha as a fires professional, having your PSYOP and CA folks for IO, things like that. And then having, SEMA with you, or your EW, going into those specialties and stuff. Maybe even LNOs from the conventional side of the house, or
that would be good.
Excuse me, or having like an attack aviation, representative, if you have that capability as well. But that's why it's important to have all of them in the room talking, because that's the way you're most effectively going to decide what type of effect is going to be most great to this target.
Okay.
And then from there, you have every representation of all the warfighting functions, essentially. So then you can start, tasking people out to start getting connections made and work their solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we replicate, or do we replicate well the real world targeting conditions at the combat training centers?
So I would say, and we've kind of talked about this a couple times now, because this is a brigade level rotation or exercise.
Typically, yes.
Yes. There's the one division rotation each year, and has some representation, but it's not necessarily a full staff, right? But outside of those rotations, a lot of the division stuff that SOF needs to be trained on or understand is just kind of notionally waved over. Just because it's not that's not desired intent. That's not the desired audience of the exercise. It's for that brigade because this is their validation to go forward and do great things. And so there just becomes some misconceptions sometimes to SOF as far as what targeting looks like in fires integration and what we really have to do to get assets versus, it's you get past a certain point of the exercise and you're out in the box and you're OCing and RTUs are PIDing just random targets at will in the box, whether it's a couple of tanks, it's a convoy, it's just a couple of fuelers, whatever. And they just think that, okay, I'm just going to submit this call for fire up to the AOB, and it's probably going to get processed through what's notionally done here, and they're going to be like, here's your sources or your assets. I've seen it a couple of times where it's been denied just because the brigade's using all the fires assets at the time. But more recently on a couple of rotations, I've seen where they've just been processed and been approved. And so then you're thinking this is strategic level fires assets that are being used to prosecute a couple tanks or maybe a fuel or something like that. And then not only that, sometimes as a teaching point to RTUs, targets move in the box. They don't just sit still the whole time. So there's been instances where, they call for fire on a target, and then by the time it got processed, whether it was, however long the kill chain took, the tank wasn't there anymore. So now it's not only have we just used a TACMS round on a tank, but it missed the tank.
Yeah.
So it just it's a struggle that just based off what CTCs are designed for, it's something that's not being forced on SOF to recognize and understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they get into the box and they want to get after it and good. They're trying to train. They're trying to train hard. But then there is all right, hey, I see the enemy and I want to engage. It's like, okay, well, if you're deep behind enemy lines, like, is that the right thing to target? Is it going to make the enemy aware that you're back here? And then is it the appropriate thing to do? And some teams I've seen recognize that, and some teams just see the enemy and they want to go destroy the enemy. And that's good at the right time in the right place. Like, have a little bit of tactical patience and like go through the targeting process, find the right time in the right place, and then go destroy the enemy through lethal or non-lethal, kinetic or non-kinetic means, like however it's appropriate at the time.
Exactly. And then I would also say the other factor that, because it kind of just gets hand-waved in some scenarios, is they're not thinking from the fire side of the house, their sustainability for these operations, because they're not thinking how resource intensive it is for munitions, the type of munitions they're using. So they're not thinking munition effectiveness either when they do this. And then you hit the nail on the head with the timing piece. This was a good example that recently happened, and it was a good teaching point for the RTU, for sure. But the team I was OCing for, they were in eye distance of the target that they were supposed to do an air or a fire mission on.
Okay.
And then for whatever reason, this or the other, it was decided, okay, you guys aren't going to have control. We at the AOB or whoever higher was going to have control of it, which is perfectly fine. But the thing they didn't consider about was the timing of it all, because now, they decided to do this fire mission outside of the execution window that they had originally planned.
Okay.
So they got 20-minute notification, and they're on the top of the mountain that's looking right down at the target. And they were like unpacking camo nets, and they're not getting far enough away before the strike happens.
Okay.
And so it was a teaching point for the AOB of that, just understand, like, that was the only key terrain near that target. So if there was people who survived the attack on that village, the strike, they're going to immediately look up there and be like, that is where...
That's an observer.
That's
location.
Definitely where they're at, and we're going to start pounding that side of the mountain with everything we have capable. So it's just a survivability thing to think about.
No, absolutely. You've mentioned liaisons. We've talked about them in previous episodes. But like, what is the importance with targeting for those special operations forces liaison elements to the conventional unit? Like, how do they provide value? When do they need to get embedded with the conventional force?
So I will start by saying this is kind of going into like what we were talking about with the white paper earlier, and me having a sit down with 18th Airborne Corps Fire Cell over Christmas and talking about it, because I had just completed the Joe Feck course, and I wanted to get this perspective having been to these two courses now. And the biggest thing is that SOF LNOs need to show up earlier than later in the planning process. Like we've talked about, whether it's a warfighter or a CTC rotation or, other exercises, the SOF representation will usually show up at day one of execution of the operation. So, from the conventional side of the house, if you want to look at it honestly, it's, hey, we're glad that you're here, for training, but you've missed all of the planning. So we really don't know how to use you in this fight right now. To fix that is that if they do show up at the beginning of the planning process and they're doing the military decision-making process, they're starting the battle rhythm events from the very first targeting cycle they do. And also walking into the room and meeting the fires professionals and being like, hey, I am SOF LNO X. I come from this SOF unit. These are the capabilities we have, and this is our operational area within your battle space that will be operating. Tell us what we can do for you. Tell us what your gaps are and what you guys are doing. And, just go from there and just build that relationship from the very start.
Absolutely. Those baseline principles taught in the 3 RSOF Tribe Q courses, rapport building, and then being able to give that elevator pitch about what you can do and what you can't do.
Exactly.
Because knowing your limitations does not, it actually helps that relationship. Like, hey, I'm good at this, I'm not good at that, and I'm here to work with you guys. Like, but the rapport thing is huge, and that's, you got to get in early, not only to be a part of it, but to build that rapport to be on that team, because that brigade or division staff is a team. They know each other. Like, you don't want to be the new person. You want to be part of the team as fast as possible.
Yep, that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
All right. Well, we've been hitting how to train for fires. Is there anything else you want to talk about, like preparation wise, prior to coming out to a combat training center? Like, how does a company or detachment like get geared into the targeting cycle? How do they prepare so that they hit the ground and they're ready to run on the targeting cycle?
So I would say, first off, doing your homework and reading, which I know a lot of us don't like to do, especially doctrine. And I'm probably more of a nerd in some aspects, being that I have a lot of the doctrine on my phone and I read it when I'm out in the box. But
oh, nice.
You start like, that's like the first step, is going into the doctrine, the joint publication and the Army publication for targeting and fires. Those are a good way to start. And then it also comes down to just sending SOF people to the professional military education courses for targeting and fires. You know, I would not have any of the perspective I've had at this point if I wasn't allowed to go to the Joint Firepower course or the JOFEC course. Those are exactly what opened the light bulb to me and made me realize what we should do as far as integrating and like how we fit. Like, it just was literally a light bulb come on. And, you know, a lot of people are kind of in the mindset of, well, you have a JTAC. That's your guy. I'm like, that is simply a capability to control aircraft. It's no different than being, you know, a Sephardic guy on a team or this or that. Like, it's the capability you bring to the team, but that does not mean that they are the targeteer for the team or the fires professional.
100%.
So,
but like, I mean, I've seen even Air Force JTACs attached to Special Forces teams out here, and it's like, hey, like, your only job is not to control aircraft. Like, you need to participate in this targeting cycle. You need to provide options for the commander. And it is like, when you only have, you know, up to 12 members of your detachment plus maybe a couple enablers and a partner force, like, every person counts. So you have to build that team, figure out those, especially if they're enablers coming from an outside unit, figure out what they know and like assign them to their strengths. And yeah, JTAC, whether they're Air Force or a SOTAC, JTAC, like, one thing that you should be doing is messaging, I need the air tasking order so I understand what's flying. But beyond that, you need to provide the commander or whoever is chairing the target nominations board, like, here's options on what we can do. And it doesn't, like, we've beat this dead Burro about, it doesn't have to be just aircraft. Like, that's easy. That's great. In a perfect world, we control the skies and we have attack aviation, attack fixed wing, and like ISR, and we could just be dominating the air domain. But like, especially at the onset of a large scale combat scenario, you're not going to be in that situation. And that detachment's going to have to generate options for themselves that also generate options for the AOB, the SODIF, and the conventional forces as well.
yeah, no, absolutely. And just going to these courses, because you'll find, so, and I'll just speak very briefly on it, but
you're good. Go for
the
it.
Joint Firepower course, so that's the first one I did, and I think it was the best one to do first because it established the baseline. It was your more so tactical, a little bit operational level targeting and fires integration. So all the stuff happening, and it's focused mostly on the air component and the Army component working together, or the land component working together. And it's all the Army methodology doctrine for targeting. And your final planning exercise for that was, it's an NTC scenario, and you basically are some member of the staff for targeting and fires, and you are helping build a kill box. Which is including your fire support coordination measures, your air support ACMs.
Okay.
Yeah, airspace coordination measures. Okay. And then, you know, like your maneuver coordination measures. And so then you're employing all these and you're building this 3-dimensional kill box, basically. So that was what made the Joint Firepower course great. And it was full of students who all are they're all like TAC Ps or people who are going to go work for like a BCD, which is a Battlefield Coordination Detachment, which is the Army element attached to an Air Operations Center.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Places like that. So that was a great baseline. And then going to the JOFEC course, it was the strategic level targeting fires integration using the joint methodology. And you're learning how the components coming together, all of them are doing targeting together. And you're talking all of the phases from the operational design based off the Joint Force Commander's or objectives and effects. And then you go into your methods of performance, methods of effects or effectiveness.
Yeah.
All of that. And then you're getting into target development, then, nominating targets, weaponeering, prosecuting, assessments, all within very detailed framework. And most of the people that were in that class were all CW3s and above, 04s and above. And they were all going to go work at these strategic level locations to be the people that, as the best way that the instructor put it, being a JOFEC grad, in theory, the Joint Force Commander is going to hold you next to him and be like looking at you during all the targeting stuff. Is this right? Is this right? Are we doing things the correct way? Do you recommend doing this? Do you recommend something different? So by saying all that, I'm saying if SOF guys get opportunities to go to those courses, then it's going to open their eyes to how this works.
Yeah.
And it's going to be able to go back as a force multiplier and educate their own home station units on this stuff, so that they can come out here better planned and prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. They get experience on how the Joint Force looks at fires and targeting. And then they get the additional benefit of meeting people in the conventional Army, in the Air Force, Marines, whoever else is attending these courses. And then through that, hopefully you build rapport, and then maybe you could train with those people that, hey, you're going to whatever unit after this course, or you're from a certain unit. Like, it'd be great if we as a detachment participated in the next exercise that you guys are doing, just so we all get a rep at this. What does targeting look like on the ground? We try our best to teach, coach, mentor that at the combat training centers, and we have some positive results, but it's not always, perfectly realistic what we're doing in our training scenarios, but we do our best to make our forces ready and lethal for whatever they go out and do. We talked a lot about, obviously, kinetic strikes. We mentioned some non-kinetic things, especially influence operations, but targeting also does include the other two domains in multi-domain operations, namely cyber and space. I would wager that the courses didn't go too heavy into those aspects, and they were more geared towards kinetic strikes or kinetic operations.
There was some very brief familiarization, but the course was not at a level of classification to go into that kind of stuff.
But anyways, we do also try to incorporate cyber and space into every rotation that we do out here and at the Joint Readiness Training Center. We've seen companies and detachments be successful by bringing specific MOSs that are more geared towards that 17 series, cyber space guys or girls. And, certain SOF soldiers that have been trained on, cyber space stuff, try to integrate that at the tactical and operational level as much as we can, just to really emphasize a multi-domain training environment while conducting large-scale combat operations. With that, this has been a great discussion. A lot of different topics covered, focusing on targeting, the targeting process, and how that actually looks at the detachment and or company level, and then what it looks like at the higher level, so that people can hopefully visualize that and recognize that you can do bottom up or top down, and it's probably going to be a mixture of both. But if you do bottom up, you can get your targets worked into the cycle. You just have to be there early, early and often, and then really understanding that those liaisons to the conventional force are huge, because they're the ones carrying the water for special operations. so that the conventional force or the joint force understands what the special operations component's really trying to get after. So thank you for your time, Dillion. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I appreciate you having me on, and being out here as an OC has just been such an incredible and rewarding experience, and it's allowed me to do these things and go to these courses. And I think if anybody gets the opportunity to go to these courses and they do them, they're going to see after completing them, like, holy cow, this is where we could take our level of training one day. Granted, we have the resources to, and the integration we can with other units with their training and stuff, but just what an opportunity it can be to further enhance our training and actually provide realistic training around the entire community between conventional and SOF. So, yeah. No,
All right.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to Off the Radar, where RSOF prepares for conflict. Like, subscribe, and share on your listening platform. Actions will determine the outcome.